we're going to get started, you guys. My first sales job, and we'll introduce the topic today, you guys, and everything. Let us know if you're hopping in, where you're coming in from. I'm on the road today in Boston, about to speak at an event hosted around the Inbound conference. So I'm at an Airbnb hanging out with you guys today. My first sales job was actually going door to door selling house painting services. That's what I did in 2008, 2009 I guess it's 2007, 2008 as a freshman in college. So fun stuff. Today, what we're going to talk about is outbound, how to land a ton of meetings in H2. The angle that we're going to take on the conversation today, a lot of this is going to come from the back end of, as a sales organization, what can you do to support the reps that are doing outbound? So we're going to talk about the culture that needs to be in place for this. We're going to talk about tools and process. We have two folks I'm going to introduce you guys here to in a second from ZoomInfo. So Copilot and AI, we're going to talk about all of the tools and process piece of the equation. If you're an account executive or leading account executives, you probably noticed that right now with the current economic conditions, you need to Salesforce pipeline in order to hit or surpass your target. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about skills and really upskilling. How do we get better at outbound, and what is the role of the sales leader in the sales org? Want to thank our sponsor before digging in. It's been honestly just awesome to work with ZoomInfo, just because I'm such a believer in the product. But one of the things that I think with AI that can be very confusing, because I get asked a lot of the time that I spend working with customers is on outbound. It's how do we get better results from the cold outreach that we're sending to land more meetings? And AI gets thrown into the equation a lot. And a lot of the AI is stuff that's like incredibly complex to use that doesn't do much thinking for you. It just kind of automates something. And what I love about ZoomInfo, and we'll talk about Copilot a little bit later today. I promise it won't be like a product pitch for Copilot, but I just love the tool. What the future of AI looks like and how Copilot is like suggesting a next step for you to do. So it is actually somewhat of a brain instead of just an extra set of hands, which I love. So I want to thank ZoomInfo for sponsoring the episode today. Awesome, Cass. Great to hear that. So without further ado, let's get to the tactics, you guys. I got Bryan Tunick on the call. He's manager of enterprise sales at ZoomInfo. Bryan, good to have you on again. We have Jack Reilly, principal revenue enablement manager at ZoomInfo. And if you're coming across Outbound Squad for the first time, my name is Jason Bay. We provide sales training, coaching, all of that kind of stuff for organizations that want to make outbound a more consistent and effective sales motion for their SDRs and account executives. All right, let's dig in, you guys. So a couple questions I'm seeing in the chat so far. Is it going to be recorded? Yes, we'll send it out to you afterwards. Dwayne asked, are we all muted? Yes, unfortunately, but you guys can interact with us through the chat. If you have a question and want to get something answered, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Throw it in there and we'll make sure to get to as many of those as we can. So the first thing that I want to talk about, and I'll kind of kick this question first your way, Jack, and feel free when you're answering the question too to maybe give some context into your role as well. One of the things that we were talking about before we hit live here, and something that I see, is this idea that if I'm a rep, an account executive, let's say, and let us know in the chat if this resonates at all with you, there are too many steps in between the enablement content that I get. So a slide deck usually that says, hey, here's a campaign that we're going to run. We're going to go after XYZ competitor. Here's some talking points. And as an account executive, I have to take like a dozen steps to actually execute on that. I have to figure out what my messaging is going to be, who I'm going to reach out to, what do I say in the talk tracks, email copy, the right people, the email addresses. There's just so many steps. And a lot of getting people to do more outbound and to be more effective at it, a lot of what your focus is like, how do we just reduce the complexity of like taking action on that? So what are your thoughts on that piece of the equation? How do you think about that from an enablement standpoint of like making it easier to do the right thing? And again, feel free to give some context into your role if you feel it helps too for the audience here.
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about this, in the past, and what I do for ZoomInfo is I am enablement. So I teach them how to sell, right? We do process, we do skills, we do behaviors, right? We start to measure those things and coach and sharpen that edge. But when we think about enabling on a process, the world of the past was really always you had to come to them with the personas that you're talking to. You wanted to give them talk tracks. You wanted to give them probably email templates. You have RevOps or someone give them a targeted list to go after, right? And there's all these cross-functional pieces that come over to like hopefully make this beautiful thing at the end. But to your
Yeah.
point, like it's a lot of stuff. And part of the challenge of being a rep is like taking all those resources, putting together, making them work for you. And I think that world is starting to change quite a bit. We've already touched a little bit on AI and things like that. But I think if you have the right tools in place, you have a tight process in place that you go to execute on, you start to have some of these tools that can surface up those people that you want to target. You can maybe get them at the right time. AI can build you a message. You can take those marketing materials and put them in, or you can have your admin do that on the back end and have it ready to go. So I think going from finding accounts to executing is a lot easier. And then once you get them on the call, that's where I think a lot of like the skill work is really coming in because that's where, sales does start at the prospecting level, and that
Yep.
process is difficult and there's a lot that goes into it. But I think some of that's starting to get easier as we find even the market becoming more challenging. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. But yeah, when we think about it, it's all those things coming together. And I think technology is helping us out a bit.
How much of what you guys do from an enablement standpoint is like literally thinking about the workflow? So, like the number of clicks maybe to do something. Are you just sitting in the seat of the rep and just being like, if I wanted to call XYZ prospect, here's what that would look like? How much of your guys' time is spent on like figuring out, like, hey, if I was a rep, what's the click path even look like? What does that look like for you guys?
We advise on quite a bit of that. We have some really great cross-functional partners, fortunately, in our organization from RevOps to sales leadership. And a lot of it's these minds coming together with enablement. We serve more of an advisory probably role in that point. And it's like, hey, did you think about this? Because the one thing that will kill a outbound process and like from an execution standpoint is making it like overly cumbersome and
Yep.
difficult because no one wants to do that. Right. So I think we do think of that and it's often sales leadership or enablement that like has that conversation with the rev ops. It's like, listen, like, have you considered
Yeah.
what this actually looks like in the real world? Because sometimes the systems aspect of things and the process design is more of
Yeah.
like, will it work than like, will it work for us?
Got it. So let's give the audience something to really kind of sink their teeth in around, like if we use AE self-sourcing as a topic. So if we kind of think about AE self-sourcing through the lens of like the culture around it, the process around it, and the upskilling around it, Bryan, let's start with you. You're managing enterprise account executives. I feel like this is the toughest audience that if they're not self-sourcing, if that muscle's not there, it's like trying to teach an old dog new tricks, as they say. So let's give people something really kind of tangible around AE self-sourcing. Let us know in the chat. Are you an account executive or leading account executives? And is self-sourcing something that you either want to do more of or be more effective at? Let us know in the chat. Just give us a quick yes if that's something that would resonate with you. Perfect. So,
There, there.
Bryan, from a culture standpoint, how do you think about just setting up like expectations around this, accountability, like what's expected of the individual around like the actual outbounding from an AE standpoint? How do you think about all that stuff?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Jason. So I'm a manager of enterprise sales here, but I've managed account executives at all levels of our business and been an account executive myself at all levels of our business. So there's different answers to this question depending on the role you're hiring for. So enterprise totally different than hiring, let's say, an entry level account executive position for self-sourcing. But either way, it starts in the hiring process in terms of building a culture. I
Yep.
think there are a lot of sales orgs out there that like to almost like boast, like 100% inbound, like all your meetings are set for you. And um, you know, one, I've never really seen that delivered on. So one, be careful if you're hearing that. But two, I mean, culturally, I don't know that that's the group you want to set up if you're interested in having a team that's self-sourcing. I think
Yeah, no kidding, right?
you want, yeah, you really want
Yeah,
you want extreme ownership from your account executives within their
yeah,
pipeline. If it's SMB or mid-market roles, you want account executives that have that hunt built into them. They have that level of ownership of their business that they can get leads off of a lead router off inbound, but they
yeah,
want to go find the best leads for themselves. They want to find situations. And the way I've always kind of sold it internally is let inbound take care of imperfect situations for you. There'll be no shortage of imperfect situations in sales from inbound. When you outbound, what you're really trying to aspire to do is set yourself up with as many perfect situations as possible because those are rare when we rely on inbound. So, and then at the enterprise level, just to round this out, it becomes much more a discussion because a lot of enterprise reps have direct, SDR, BDR pairings. It becomes more of a conversation around who's owning what level of the organization, who's gathering information, what kind of information do we need before, an account executive puts in a call to a VP. Because you don't just cold call a VP and start doing discovery in the enterprise. You
yeah.
cold call a VP with a perspective. So it does change a little bit as you go up market.
Okay, I want to really like peel the onion back on this AE self-sourcing piece. Let's talk first about you said one of the ways that you sell AE self-sourcing is, hey, treat the inbound as this is for imperfect situations. We don't need inbound in order to hit or surpass our quota. It's kind of the idea there. And feel free, either of you, to comment on this. How else do you think about incentivizing the AEs to do more outbound? And I'll give you some examples. Like some of my customers, let us know in the chat if you guys are doing this at your org. Sometimes they'll pay a higher commission on self-sourced. Another one of my clients, I don't know if this is extreme or not, but they have an inbound rotation for the AEs, and the AEs that self-source the most amount of pipeline and closed won deals, they get rewarded with more inbound leads too. So I thought that was kind of interesting. How do you guys think about this, if at all, like really selling the account executive around like doing more self-sourcing? Is there anything other than what we've shared so far that's like a tactical thing that someone can go take away and do?
Yeah, I'll start at like the team level, and then Jack, you could speak to this more from the org level. But on the team level, one, and this is a quote that comes from my boss George and his boss Kayla. You have to inspect what you expect. So we're all using a CRM. You need a dashboard that shows that self-sourcing funnel that you can look at in that pipeline review from, targeted accounts or however you define them, to dials, to meetings set, to demos completed, to pipeline created, to dollars earned. Salespeople respond to being placed on a leaderboard, and then find who's going to be the one who everyone needs to chase and help empower that person. Because if you can get that person off to a strong start, the rest will go to them and chase them because you have it on a leaderboard. And then, I mean, just for fun, like I used to do when I was in SMB here, a wheel spin every single month, where you could earn slots based on self-sourcing dollars and meetings, and we would give out fun
Yeah,
prizes. I would self-fund that because it was worthwhile to me to self-fund it. I mean, it's not like I
yeah,
ever Peloton on there or anything, but it was, people enjoyed it. It was a chance to get together, and that
yeah.
was the main things we incentivized.
So I love this idea of the dashboard, the leaderboard. This is something that you guys, even for the reps on here, this is something that you can push your frontline leader or the sales execs to do, is create that dashboard so that there's visibility and transparency around like what other people are doing. It can be very, very powerful. When people start to see and hear stories that, like one of my big clients, one of the things that they do too is they have a Slack channel that's just dedicated for outbound, and they save a piece of their all hands meetings where the VP of sales, this is for an org with like 800 people, they'll come on and give shout outs to people that are sourcing a ton of pipe. So just like the congratulatory nature of like highlighting people that are doing this really well is a really big part of it too. Jack, what are your thoughts from an org-wide standpoint? How do you think about selling AE self-sourcing? I think something we talked about, correct me if I'm wrong, at one point was, what do the win rates look like, the deal sizes, how quickly a lot of the self-source deals closed? Is that something that you talk about at all from a data perspective? And is there anything else that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of thoughts on this. One, like from a deal perspective, outsourced stuff closes faster, it closes for more. Like that is and it closes more frequently, right? So it hits all of the metrics that you want. Any inbound or outbound type measure that you're going to have, outbound outperforms those things because you're right at power, right? And this is something I was going to talk about too when it comes to like that inbound versus outbound perspective and like building that culture, building that mentality. Bryan, you hit the nail on the head when you're like, you got to hire for this. An
Yeah,
inbound lead, like most of the time you just end up doing going through like a multi-threading motion anyways if you can't get that person on board as a champion, right? So that's something we work
yeah,
on a lot from a skill perspective is like how do you turn that person into a champion, get audience with power. And you can work on that skill all you want, but there's going to be a certain percentage of them that just won't, right? They just don't want to put their neck on the line to go put you in front of leadership. So now the seller just has to go run a multi-threading motion around that to get to power, which is, surprise, surprise, very, very, very similar to a outbound prospecting motion, right? If you don't have
yeah,
your champion on board. So setting that expectation is really important. And for all those reasons, from an organizational standpoint, we talked about the WIFM, the what's in it for me for outbound prospecting for self-sourcing your own meetings. They're faster, they close more frequently, close for more, all great things. In addition to that, right now we actually are running a spiff behind this to further incentivize them to close self-sourced meetings. Now, when you are a bigger ship to steer, we'll say, a spiff is an easy way to do it. If you're a smaller, more nimble organization, you could build in a commission adder to that. There's a lot of
yeah,
complexities as you go into bigger businesses and like the downstream impacts of those things, especially when you have cross-functional teams again, like the SDR organization and all those, like it can get a little messy. So the spiff makes it easy in those situations. But I remember when years ago selling solar, I would, and I never liked door knocking, right? Not to bring it back to this, but any appointment I
yeah,
ran, I'm going to go knock on a couple doors because I get paid more when one of those hits and it takes 5 minutes of my time, right? So I liken a lot of those very simplistic things to the more complex like SaaS motion that we run right now. Um, Last piece I want to say on this, which comes into Bryan, your conversation of dashboards. Anyone want to take a guess why enablement loves dashboards?
Same reason I do, I'm guessing.
Same reason you do. And then for my enablement content, I'm going to go reach out to the person on top of that dashboard. I'm going to feature
yeah,
them in whatever skills sessions I have. They're going to go tell everyone the great things that they do. I'll probably go watch their calls and pull out some of the great stuff that they do that they don't even know about. Feature that in call coaching sessions, feature that in skill teach sessions, have them actually speak to the team. Like there's all sorts of great things. And now you have this really cyclical thing that's kind of self-feeding machine. You get this cool flywheel effect. And from an enablement standpoint, probably would guess based on how much I'm talking right now, people will get bored of me talking at some point and want to hear it from the actual reps that are selling the deals.
yeah. I think you bring up such a great point there in that enablement, part of being great at enablement is taking a back seat and being more of a host and a facilitator of someone that is doing really well because there's built-in credibility there. There's so much that you guys just dropped there. Like there's the spiffs, the leader dashboard is like such a simple, actionable thing. I find most companies don't like. I find with outbound, if you're trying to take a primarily inbound led organization and make it outbound, which a lot of companies that I work with in that like 100 to 200 mil ARR range, they're just like kind of tapped the marketing leads at that point. If it's not your organization's number one priority to make happen, in my experience, it just doesn't happen. And if you don't have a dashboard to track outbound sourced pipeline and meetings and closed won deals, like how important could it possibly be if you're not measuring it at all? So it's a super simple thing that you guys can implement. Um, so let's talk about, I want to talk about the skills component of self-sourcing. And I think this will kind of segue into like the tooling and the co-pilot approach and that sort of stuff. Um, Bryan, I'll kind of kick this question your way first. When you think about the skills of doing outbound and self-sourcing, I kind of think that there's like a targeting aspect to this, like who do I reach out to? What accounts am I going to focus on? There's like a messaging standpoint. What do I say to these people? And then there's kind of like a channel mastery execution component, like how good am I on the phone versus email versus social, et cetera. If we were to focus on that targeting piece, just feel free to elaborate on Copilot if you want to. How as an account executive, how are you helping them think about like where to point their efforts? Because I think that's everything right now. Is outbound is very hard. It's not as easy to get the reply rates. Fewer people pick up the phone. So where we decide to invest effort is so important. Can you speak on that part first?
Yeah, I can for sure. I think, it comes back around to like a very straightforward concept. And I think this applies to self-sourcing in the biggest way. If it's not easy, it's not going to happen. So we went from a world of, making 200 dials a day to get to appointments. That's been gone for a long time. Then we spent a long time where we were expecting reps to kind of swim around in these little separate data lakes and try and find a story, right? And so LinkedIn and Google and the company website and ZoomInfo at this time was just a better version of that problem. I'll throw us under the bus. Our intent data was in one little data lake. Our website visitor tracking data was in another little data lake. Our exec changes were in another data lake. And so it was easier with us, but we were still putting a lot on the reps to tell a coherent story about an account, being, low hanging fruit or ready to go, ready to buy. And so that really is what we're using now, not just selling, but also using with ZoomInfo Copilot is instead of putting them through all of these separate little data lakes, every single person has a list of targeted accounts and Copilot is telling that story. So it's never just one signal, right? It's never just a company researching packaging. It's them researching packaging, maybe a couple of unique visits to your website, hiring a new head of logistics. And when those things come together and Copilot tells that story in a very straightforward way, that's the time to go after that account within your target account list. And then we're gonna, recommend the exact action and help you perform that action with an AI-driven email, something that's personalized, something that's not going to feel like, oh, I'm getting dripped again by yet another sequence. And yeah, it's got my
Yeah,
first name in all caps. But the rest of it is just the same, right?
yeah. Can you speak real quick on from a targeting standpoint? And Copilot's helping out with a lot of this, it sounds like. If you were given other account executives advice here that maybe don't have Copilot yet, besides go get it, and people managing AEs, how should they think about like which accounts to prioritize? And where I'm kind of going with this is like, should they be thinking about, hey, have we run a closed won or closed lost report and looked at like what are there certain industries maybe where we get 80% of our business? Are there certain personas? Should we focus on accounts where there's intent data or specific types of triggers? Like, is there anything like that when you guys didn't have Copilot and you had to give guidance around like where to spend your time? Is there anything else that you can share with the group?
Yeah, like let me take Copilot and ZoomInfo completely out of the equation, which is really hard for me. But let me do that for a second. I'm also a ChatGPT customer. I'm
Yeah,
fortunate enough to have their Search GPT product, which is in beta, but you could do this with any ChatGPT product. And maybe this is my enterprise hat, being on right now. But I prioritize accounts where we have a point of view where we can actually go through and we use AI a ton Go through the earnings calls, go through the transcripts if you're focusing on big enough accounts, find out what the major corporate objectives are. And if you can reach out to somebody and really align behind one of those objectives, because remember, we have to execute on this, you're going to be way more likely to get a meeting. So, an old boss of mine, Scott Luttrell, used to say, focus on the accounts that you can help the most. Focus on the accounts where you have a point of view, and one that ideally you can get across in 5 seconds so that you can make a successful cold call and actually get a meeting. And even if you don't have ZoomInfo, with Claude, ChatGPT out there, Search GPT, Perplexity, all these tools out there, many of them free. It's, you don't have to pour through a 10K to come up with that point of view anymore. So that's out there.
Definitely. One of the best things that I was taught in sales early on was you want your pipeline to look less like a pipeline and more like a martini glass, or it's, I have all of these opportunities and I want to shrink the pool of accounts that I'm working and just go deeper on accounts that, Bryan, to your point, have some things going on that we can go really deep in. Jack, anything from an enablement standpoint when you're thinking org wide around this targeting piece and helping people figure out where to spend their effort?
Yeah, we're actually talking a lot about this right now. We just always do. I mean, it's what we're obsessed with the funnel and with go-to-market, so that shouldn't come as a surprise. But when we think about like where to spend our time, it's helpful sometimes to break down like where people are in that funnel that you're talking about, because you have kind of these accounts that are pre-funnel, right? That you want to know when is the right time to reach out. These are the ones that you're prospecting to, you're sending messaging, you're finding what works, what doesn't. And there is a trap there to say, hey, we closed this big deal in manufacturing, let's say, let's just go like all in on manufacturing. Because when you do that, like it makes sense and it seems easy, but you're still just like shouting out into the void of these things, right? So you're just screaming now, oh, we help manufacturing. Look at this one company we closed. And I remember a world probably 5 years ago, almost now, when like we fell into that same trap quite a bit. So again, not the Copilot plug, but the signaling really helps, like understanding when these people are actually ready to buy. And you have that. Once you get beyond that, you do have like, okay, so maybe these people aren't ready to buy, but they are what I know is good fits. I know they either fit my market or we have a really good ASP here. These are a deal that I'm comfortable going and talking about, because I think when you go have that conversation, that's the next step of it, right? If you come off as an expert, you've had it a couple times, you know the problems that they have, you can have that really easily. But I feel like the other parts that people don't realize is that there's this other actual in cycle stage of like the people that you talk to, maybe they weren't ready now. And it's really easy just to like brush that aside and say like, okay, you know what, they didn't buy. I'm done with that. But what happens when they start to signal again? And what happens when they become ready to buy? Maybe they told you they want to talk in a year from now, but really it's 6 months and they start doing research again. So you kind of have that piece of the funnel, and we're starting to look at that a little bit more closely. And then obviously you have like your true in funnel opportunities. But when you break it down by some of those chunks, you can then start to think about, okay, now that I know where these people are, how do I engage with them? How do I go actually win in these various things? And you can align process to that. And that's when you can be really effective. It's like, here they are,
Yeah.
here's what I see, here's the play I'm going to run. And if you happen to have a great sales intelligence and execution tool, like all the better. But you should still be thinking about it that way, regardless of what you're using.
Well, let's segue into that piece, Jack. I think so. The theme for today is how do we land a ton of meetings, right, in H2? We've talked about AE self-sourcing quite a bit. This is something that if you can get this muscle going in your organization or as an account executive yourself, there's definitely a huge opportunity there. The second thing, you sort of elaborated on this and alluded to it, how do we treat all of the stuff that's not super cold outbound from people that might not have much intent or that are not in our current ecosystem, and then a paying customer? There's a lot of stuff in between that's like a closed lost deal, that we're going to re-engage. A deal that has gone dark, our MQLs, all of that kind of stuff. People that didn't raise their hand and sign up for a demo. Um, Bryan, I'll kick this question over to your way first. How do you think about an AE's time and how much time is dedicated to kind of working stuff that's more of those mid-stage deals that might have some engagement, or it's an MQL, let's say. It's not like this super cold, I'm just going to go outbound on a net new opportunity. What part does this play? Because I feel like that's lower hanging fruit and stuff that has a higher likelihood to close quickly if it's someone that's in our ecosystem that we've talked to before, potentially, that sort of thing. How do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly that's going to start with running a tight ship in terms of pipeline management and in terms of managing opportunities in your pipeline reviews, and making sure that your reps aren't carrying a lot of dead weight in their pipeline, because that's going to make it very difficult for them to identify where they should actually focus in their pipeline. So that's the first place where I would be looking is, are you running a really, really tight ship in terms of pipeline reviews, what you're letting your reps keep open as opposed to like what you're pushing them to mark close lost or close dead or whatever you call it, and starting there. And then from there, it's sorry to be repetitive, but like if I can't measure it, I can't have them do it. That's just the reality of it. So I have to make reawakening a deal, relivening a deal, whatever you want to call it, with a mid-stage op feel as good and look as good on that dashboard or in that Slack channel as self-sourcing a new D1 with just some random company. Um,
Yeah,
and and so I have to be able to measure it, and then I have to be able to celebrate it. If I can't do those two things, I'm gonna have a really hard time building a culture around it. And so that's how I start thinking about that.
I love that. Yeah, if you can't measure and celebrate, you can't create a culture around it. So that's pretty interesting. Is there, Bryan, does some of this have to be tracked manually for you until like a report can get created? Or is this like how do you think about that piece? Because I feel like so much of this is kind of out of the box stuff that if there's a sales leader on here listening and watching, might be like, hey, that sounds really good, but that's going to require us to create a Salesforce dashboard. I got to go through ops, and that might take a couple of weeks. I want to do this right now, kind of thing. How
Yeah,
much of it, if you were to get kind of tactical around that, is just like, okay, cool, like I can measure it, but I'm going to have to do it maybe on a spreadsheet for now until I have something for it.
if it's really going to move the needle for me, I'll measure it on a spreadsheet. But like, let's be clear, don't underestimate the power of a Slack channel, of a team Slack channel, and just like a
Yeah,
great screenshot and a great shout out. I mean, I know we're all salespeople and I know we're all coin operated to some degree, but let's face it, salespeople also like recognition. Um,
yeah,
got got President's Club coming up. There's gonna be a bunch of salespeople celebrating their recognition. Like, use that. That's a very powerful tool. And it can be as simple as shouting it out in a Slack channel and pinning it in that Slack channel every single time you shout it out. And at the end of the month, look at all the pins in that Slack channel, and you'll see how many times you shouted out certain people for reawakening that mid-stage op or whatever it is you're trying to do. And then definitely bug your RevOps team for the proper Salesforce reports and all that. Of course, don't let them off the hook.
but anything, Jack, from an org standpoint around kind of re-engaging closed lost opportunities, deals that might have engagement already, deals that are stalled, anything from an enablement standpoint you guys think about there in terms of getting an entire org of people to not only do this, but to do it properly? Because I feel like with closed lost deals, for example, one of the worst things is for you to just send some generic email to someone. I know that you guys have like specific closed lost reasons and might re-engage people based on, did we lose to a competitor? Did we lose because they said the price was too high? Did they not have budget? Is there anything else like that? Any little tidbits you can give us that are tactical?
We just ran an entire enablement series on this actually.
Yeah.
So very timely. Um, yeah. If you go look at your closed lost deals, and especially those that maybe have multiple opportunities that have been closed lost, like they've opened up an opportunity and then gone away, stalled out, disappeared, whatever it may be, there will be a very high, I will wager, and I am a gambling man, there's going to be a very high percentage of those that you're not at power.
Yeah.
It is probably the number one reason that we lose deals is that we spend a bunch of time on a deal that we don't have power, and we'll talk to that person again and again and again and again and again because they're really easy for like maybe an SDR to engage with. They'll take the meeting again. They'll say, "Oh, we'll give you lower pricing, or there's new features, or whatever it is to get that meeting." But in reality, you are with the wrong person, and that deal is not going to close until you either get that person to agree to get you in front of power, or you just go around them and get to power yourself, which again is just that outbound motion.
Jack, you said something really important there. It was hidden. You said, because that person's easy for the SDR to engage with. And there was an interesting comment in the thread earlier. I forgot exactly who it was about like why have AEs do sourcing, when you could have someone who's dedicated do that. Well, a lot of what we end up with are misaligned incentives, right? Where, SDRs just care about getting a meeting. So they become obsessed with these, reset appointments, people who will talk to us. And that's all they care about because they get the meeting. Account executives don't source to get meetings, they source to get revenue. And unless you're a very evolved sales organization that's aligned your sales development team with revenue, which in my experience represents very, very little today of the sales orgs I've talked to, then those AE generated leads are going to be way, way, way better because the meeting means nothing to them. In fact, it's actually work for them that they're creating. Unless it's going to lead to revenue, they're not going to do it.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about this, and this will not be a ZoomInfo thing, this will be an everyone thing, you need to be really, really prescriptive in your system of record as to why it was that that deal didn't go the way that you wanted it to. We've recently implemented, we have something called good fit and bad fit, right? We have these bad fit reasons. We recently looked at them and said, you know what, these aren't fully representative of what's going on within these deals. So now we have these actual good fit reasons that are like, hey, it's a good fit, but we're not at the right person or it is not the right time to engage. And even usually those ones are still not the right person, right? Don't take a no from someone that can't give you a yes.
Yeah.
But once you have that, you can go run very specific processes towards these folks that might be back on the SDRs, they might be on the AEs, they might be on marketing or a combination there within, but you can get pretty strategic about how you go attack these. And if you have the right tools in your stack, it can make it a little bit easier. But just even knowing who's who in those and why you lost those deals, because that's, what motion you need to go after it. A cold call is really tough when you don't have a reason for that cold call, right? You're just like, oh, it's a good fit. I'm going to go pick up the phone, call this person, or I'm going to go target some emails at me, even if it's hyper relevant to problems they have. Like if it's not relevant to what's going on within their own personal buyer journey and why that deal failed to come to conclusions, you're just going to be running against a wall every single time. You're going to get the same outcome. I think that's the definition of insanity, right?
Yeah. No,
So those
totally.
are some of the things we're tackling.
Yes, this is such a big takeaway for anyone that's on this call that's in that RevOps role or a sales leader, like working with RevOps or sales ops, is to get more prescriptive around the closed lost reasons. It's how can you do work now that makes future work for a rep easier? Because when you have to go through a deal, even if the call is recorded, it takes so long to go through a closed lost opportunity that doesn't have the right reason attached to it, and you have to go listen back to recordings. It's almost not even worth doing unless you're selling enterprise. Like especially if you're doing something that's a little more SMB, a little more volume based or mid market, you want to be able to quickly go through these and be able to treat the deals or the opportunities or the closed loss, whatever it is, like in pockets with themes so that I can speak to people fairly similarly. I think that's a really big thing with outbound right now too, is like, how can I find little pockets where I can speak to these people in a very similar way? Because you don't have time to customize every single thing that you do.
Yeah. Pull out those ones where you're not at power and toss them through whatever the same motion for your outbound prospecting is. And those
Yeah.
are going to be way hotter leads than really most of the stuff that you get from inbound or outbound. And the process is damn near exactly the same. So that'd be my recommendation there.
I would take that same diligence if you're a sales manager trying to get your account executives to run an repeatable, ongoing self-sourcing operation. Bring that same level of detail to whatever reporting you're going to build out in Salesforce. So like what I'm not saying is just like have on your dashboard the number of self-sourced dollars quarter to date per rep. Like that's not enough because you need this dashboard isn't just a motivational tool, right? It's how you can customize your coaching. So if you have the details on that dashboard, like a funnel, targeted accounts, appointments booked, appointments completed, dollars created, revenue created, then when you sit down in a pipeline review with that account executive and you look at that funnel, and if they're not self-sourcing, you can spot exactly where the leak is, right? So if they're setting a lot of appointments, but they're not getting a lot of completed demos, maybe they're not nurturing those appointments enough in between the set and the meeting to get someone to show up, or maybe they're booking with the wrong person, or you could find exactly where it's broken. So take that level of detail to any kind of reporting you're doing.
Just like how your accounts tell a story that you can go tell back to them, your pipeline tells a story too.
Yeah.
And it's the manager's responsibility to bring that out and tell that story back to the rep.
Love it. So let's give, because it looks like there's quite a bit of reps on the call just from what's here in the chat. Let's give some tactics, you guys. So first, let's talk about pickup rates. What are you guys seeing from a pickup rate standpoint? And how should people think about ways to maybe increase their pickup rate? I'm seeing, I don't know what you guys are seeing, somewhere between 3 and 6% across the board, depending on the customer that I work with. Yeah, Daniel says 5% for my team. How do you guys think about pickup rates? When to call people? What times of day or certain days of the week? How to increase them? How do you guys enable around pickup rates? And then we'll kind of dig into some phone stuff for fun.
I'm sure Jack has some fun stuff on that. I mean, stuff on this. If you're not using cell phones, you're not using phones.
Yeah.
Like period. Like if you're using a number other than the cell phone, you're just not really using the phone, and you might as well try something else. But what we're seeing, like people pick up their cell phones. You just have to make sure that you're doing things correctly. So one, a call, should be a part of a strategy. It should be a part of a multi-touch strategy. It shouldn't just be a thing that exists in a vacuum. Um, I'm a big fan of video, for instance. Like I'll send customized videos into accounts, very high touch, but it makes those calls so easy because I'm the guy who made you that custom video and I know who watched it and all that stuff. Again, not ZoomInfo talk. That's Vidyard. We have, we do. They're not a ZoomInfo company. But it's the age of the standout salesperson. Like no matter what you're doing, you have to be standing out from the other dozens of people who are just sending a generic message in, just picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, do you have 27 seconds to talk about cybersecurity?" If you're doing that, you're dead in the water. You got to be picking up the phone and saying something of relevance, something to grab their attention. And people who are doing that are having a ton of success.
Maybe you got about 15 seconds to get their attention.
Yeah. Because I do want to talk about cold calling, and I'm curious about your guys' thoughts on this. One thing also with pickup rates, there's a couple things that really help that are really underrated. So Orem, a dialing tool, they did a study of around 7 million calls made through their system. What they noticed is that when people left a voicemail on the first call, the pickup rate, the second, third, fourth, fifth time you call someone would go up by 25-ish%.
Yes.
So take 5% and add 25% on top of that. That's like a 6 or 7 or 6.5% pickup rate. It's the difference between an extra meeting every week, depending on how many calls that you're making. So with that voicemail, one of the tips that I have for voicemail is don't ask for a call back, point them to your email. So instead of saying, hey, again, it's Jason, call me back at XYZ number, it's like, hey, I just sent you an email. And the subject line is, boom, thought you'd find it interesting because it looks like you're, hiring a ton of SDRs right now is maybe something I would say. Another thing that's really interesting too, a lot of the sales engagement platforms have found this in their data. I'm not sure what you guys have seen, is when you leave voicemails, it actually will as much as double the reply rate through your sequence if you're consistent about it.
Yeah.
So just because people don't pick up the phone doesn't mean that they're not listening to voicemail. Voicemail literally has like a 90+% open rate. It doesn't mean that people are listening to the entire voicemail, but I don't know about you guys, like my voicemails are transcribed. Like I open every single one. I don't listen to it, but I look to see, is this someone that I don't know? Okay, delete it. Nowhere else are you going to have 90+% opportunity of someone seeing something or listening to something.
That's what I was going to say.
But
Go ahead.
let's talk about cold calls though. So Jack, you said first 15 seconds to grab their attention. How do you guys coach around the first, Chorus had a stat. It's kind of old now, but it's probably something very similar. The average cold call lasts only 80 seconds. And like cold calls are won and lost in that first 60 seconds. And it's literally like, how do you say hello? Do you ask for the person's name or not? I mean, there's like all kinds of little nuance. How do you, Jack, in your skill sessions that you guys run, how do you enable around the phones? What are you guys teaching?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of really interesting things. I'd have to go look at the average cold call. Average probably isn't the way to look at it because a lot of that's going to be once you get someone is going to be kind of dragged out. I actually find when I was looking at a lot of our sellers cold calls that like the ones that worked were longer, right? There's a lot of the ones that are shorter, usually you didn't book a meeting. When you book a meeting, those can go 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes, right? Depending on how eager that person is and how much they want to learn. And hey, if you got an audience right now and you can do a little bit of selling, I know you should be selling the meeting, but like give them enough to want to come back to the meeting. So I'd find that in a lot of our top sellers that were doing outbound, that the successful calls were longer. So you'd probably be better looking at like the median than the average. So that I found really interesting. When it comes to the skill stuff on the phones, really what we teach quite a bit is the pattern interrupt. Now, in our business, we sell to salespeople, which I think gives us a bit of an edge there. But they would always ask if they're taking on new business. So they do that quick pattern interrupt. Hey, I realize that probably caught you out of the blue with this cold call. Can you give me 17 seconds to explain to you why I'm calling? Bryan, I know you love this one.
Well,
Odd numbers.
I'm laughing because there's people in the chat saying that when they call people's cell phone numbers, that they're getting asked, where'd you get my cell phone number? And my message, and no one's going to like it, is that if someone's response to your opening is, how did you get my cell phone number? It's your opening that's broken, not cell phone numbers.
Yeah.
Like it's not the cell phone number's fault. It's like, you need to improve your opening. Because if you come in with something super compelling, like what Jack's saying, are you looking to take on new business course? And you can get them into the conversation, then they just kind of forget to ask that question.
It's like tickle them intrigued at that point. They're gonna say, once you ask them, they're gonna, if they're taking on new business, they say like, of course I am, or they say no, and like in that case, yeah, move on with your life. But once you get them intrigued, you get them asking questions about it, you got to have a real tight elevator pitch as well associated with that. So make sure you know what you're gonna say. Typically goes pretty well. I'm all for like being dynamic and like reacting to the person exactly what they have on the call, but like we've got a pretty tight script and it works like really, really well. Last piece I'll say on that, and this is a little bit more anecdotal, it was a lot of old data that you'd see here. I'd be interested to see the latest on it. I love calling at the end of the day.
Yeah, people need that last hour out. I'm not, these days I'm not a fan of local presence. I don't really think if you have that in your dialer, I don't think it's doing many people many favors. I, I just think people assume that anything that's calling them from their own area code is spam, and more people live further away from where they got their original cell phone plans than ever before in history. So if someone's calling me from Long Island and I live in Westchester, like it's a very, very low chance that that's going to be it. And so, I don't use local presence. Make sure you double tap, as uncomfortable as it is. Robocalls do not double tap. They do not call twice in a row. So as uncomfortable as it is, call twice in a row. And if they answer on that second call, just say, oh, hey, Jim, it looks like I got you. I was about to leave a voicemail, but my other call cut out. But now that I have you on the phone, like you just
Yeah.
haven't.
People
Yeah.
do this to me all the
Calling
time.
afternoon. Yeah. So I think with that opener, it sounds like both of you are in favor of some sort of permission-based opener. I was just literally doing a bunch of cold call workshops yesterday with a bunch of clients. I'll give you guys some variations of what those permission-based openers could sound like. The why behind it is a cold call by definition. You're calling someone, it doesn't matter how much you research them or how strong the intent is, they didn't ask you to call them. So giving them an opportunity to opt into the conversation is pretty powerful. One of the easiest, most simple ones that you can do sounds something like this. Hey, Bryan, it's Jason. I know you weren't expecting my call. You got a minute for me to share the reason for my call, and you can let me know if you want to continue chatting. One that Armand Farouk over at 30 Minutes to President's Club, the Have You Heard Our Name Tossed Around one. I've been teaching that one a lot lately. This is really great if you work with very niche type companies or work in a local geography, let's say, like you're working with government municipalities in the state of Texas or in a specific county. You could say something like, hey, Jack, it's Jason. I was giving you a call because we work with a lot of contractors in the state of Texas, like X, Y, and Z. Have you heard our name tossed around? So you can drop in like social proof or some sort of localization. This works really great if you sell into like federal, government, schools, anything like that, or something that's like more of a local offering, or if it's more territory specific. Those are really, really good. Um, One other tip that I'll give you, Jack, you had mentioned like the elevator pitch. I know you guys at ZoomInfo talk a lot about customer voice. And I think what's really big in that intro is like if let's say I'm selling an e-com solution, to not do things that sound like this. Yeah, Bryan, appreciate you taking the call. I was giving you a call because we sell a unified commerce platform that does X, Y, and Z. And I was wanting to see if we could schedule some time to talk about it. You're going to get a lot of not interested, not right now. Send me an email. We already have one of those tools, etc. The thing that you want to do is speak more from customer voice and share like what you hear your customers actually saying. And it's going to sound something more like, yeah, Bryan, we actually work with hundreds of e-com and D2C owners. And typically what we hear is a focus around one of two things, or typically what we hear is challenges in one of two areas. One, people are going to the website, they're going through the checkout process, and then for whatever reason, they don't actually click the buy button. And there's some things broken in there. Second thing we hear is blah, 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 blah. How does that resonate with you? And like when you can get that at the beginning of the call where you're speaking from customer voice, giving an actual problem that you hear in their language, the number one goal in a cold call is to reduce skepticism. And you do that by showing them that you understand their world. That's a really, really good way to do it. I know that you guys do that really, really well at ZoomInfo. Those are my kind of tidbits. I know this is not a cold calling webinar, but since we're talking about it and it's kind of my thing, from a sales training standpoint, thought I'd share some of this stuff. Anything that you two would add from a skill standpoint on the phones, anything else? We got like 2 or 3 more minutes here.
Jason, you talked about leaving a voicemail and how that improves connect rates. You're probably going to send an email. Make sure it's all tied together. So in that email, hey, Jason, just tried you at XYZ number, but figured I would follow up with an email. Make it cohesive. The subtle message here is I'm really trying to reach you and I'm not going to stop.
Yeah.
So come, answer and say no to me, or answer and at least have a 5-minute conversation. But when you drop those little cohesive messages, it makes the whole thing feel a lot more organic, or maybe it just is organic if you're using sequencing or not, and your response rates will go up.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where just because you're doing omni-channel, phone, email, social, doesn't mean that it feels like that for your prospect.
Shouldn't.
So if I call someone on a Tuesday and then I email Jack you on Thursday and then I call you again next Monday, if you're a really busy exec that's getting a lot, like hit up a lot, you're not going to know that all of that is from the same person. So you have to like really connect the channels together to make it feel multi-channel, omni-channel. And we don't know our customers' communication preferences. I happen to be a guy that teaches a lot about cold calling, but I don't pick up cold calls. Email is the place to get a hold of me, even though I'm on LinkedIn every day. Don't message me there. Like, it's email. For a lot of prospects that I work with through sales cycles, sometimes they only want to DM with me through LinkedIn for some reason. Some people only want to text. And then some people are really big on the phone. So you don't really know what their communication preference is. So it's definitely important to do multi-channel.
And stick with it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bryan.
Stick with
Yeah.
it. You know, if like, you're testing these channels, and if somebody texts you back, stick with text. I mean, they're telling you something by texting you back.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys, this has been great. We got to take off. In the chat, I dropped a link for Copilot. Go check it out. Go take a demo with these guys. Like, you're going to be pretty surprised, actually, in a good way, with what it's capable of doing and how it might help you guys. Bryan, Jack, thank you for coming on. Is there anything that you two want people to go check out? I think, Bryan, like, are you guys hiring or anything like that? Maybe if someone wants to consider working for ZoomInfo, anything else that the folks watching and listening should check out?
Find me on LinkedIn, Bryan Tunick. That's pretty much where I'm at. I wish I was on something cooler, but I'm just on LinkedIn. And I'm always interested in talking to people who are interested in selling ZoomInfo. So please reach out to me about that. And I'm always happy to facilitate a conversation, whether it's with me or someone else in the org. I will get you in touch.
Similarly, you can find me on LinkedIn. My beard's not quite as impressive in that picture, but should probably get a new one up. Happy to chat with anyone enablement wise. I love to talk shop and things like that. We do have a couple open enablement positions right now here at ZoomInfo. So if you are coming from that side of the house, we'd love to hear from you. But yeah, you can find us there. And I'll leave one last thing to your point, Jason. I pick up phone. You will not get me on email. So I love that as well, right? So give me a shout if you have ZoomInfo and can find me.
Cool. Thanks, you too. Later, everyone. Have a good one. We'll see you.